So I guess one of the questions that I sort of tee up for the panel, and I'll probably go to Mike yourself first, very much around the sort of the philosophy of shifting the nomenclature of patient and making that deemed customer, and actually working on what that customer ambition is. What does the customer need? What sort of care are they looking for? Are we doing enough in that area? Are we putting all our energies too much into the R&D and the manufacturing tech and get carried away with science for science, or are we putting enough in that patient side?
I think one of the challenges we face is that we characterize the customer as one monolithic customer around the world. And what has become increasingly apparent is that our customer, even as we look at the physician, the payer, and the patient, already we see three, but even amongst those three, there are drastically different needs, certainly for patients as well as for payers and for physicians. And we need to do a better job of recognizing the multitude of needs and ask the question, what can we do as fast and efficient innovation to provide for their needs and give them the most value out of what we spend the rest of our time doing, which is creating great medicines and therapies.
Just building on that, Bernadette, you talked in GSK creating this ecosystem, bringing together the manufacturing and the development. Do you think GSK is really pushing that agenda far enough in that ecosystem? Is there enough commercial? Is there enough around sort of the patient advocacy involvement in those forums?
We're certainly now back integrating into commercial. Could we have done it earlier? Absolutely. But building on Mike's points, the patient insights is absolutely critical. One size fits nobody, I think, is the phrase that I would use. As a occasional asthmatic, and what I found very valuable is now with consumer health, as part of my technical organisation, using some of the insights from consumer insights to feed back into the way we design our products is absolutely essential, and I think that's a critical part of the manufacturing technology innovation roadmap. Start with the patient. We also need to not forget about the payer. And, when we talk about who is the customer, again, the payer plays a key role also. Yeah.
Just an interesting one there, just building on where we're getting our inspiration from and ideas. Gerard, you sort of threw some of the quotes there from the likes of Apple, from Google, for example. Are we, as an industry, are we seeking enough inspiration from outside our industry, or are we still too focused within our own pharma and life sciences, biopharma world?
Yeah, good question. At AbbVie, we have this kind of a saying that 99% of the inspiration is not going to come from inside our walls. It's going to be outside of our walls. So we have a much more external focus. We have teams of people looking for ideas outside. But some of the best ideas, I think, are going to come from where you bring, with this that folks were talking about earlier, the intersection of different technologies. And they may be totally unexpected. So a biology with some other technology, and somebody has to be there to make that link. And how do you bring those two things together? Because quite often the folks who are inventing the technology don't understand our business. They don't understand the biology, and then the biologists may, if they're not looking for alternative approaches, may not be able to link the two together. So you kind of need somebody to bring these things together.
Maybe just adding on to that, to Gerard's point, one of the biggest opportunities, I think, is the way that we phrase the problem statement, so that we can take it to people that are non-traditionally associated with pharma, and to create that open innovation environment.
And I guess sort of building on that, and I'll probably bring this to our resident mountain climber, the risk question. Your talk, you talked around sort of the probability risk sort of equation there. When we're looking to externalize, talk to others, is leadership within the industry, are they taking on enough risk? Are they taking on enough ambition to really engage differently with the patient, bring the new technologies and innovations to the table? What would your perspective be on that?
Well, it's easy for me as an academic to be critical of the leadership in the industry. But having sat in various ways on both sides of that fence, I think there's a risk aversion there's a fear of failing that we all have. You know, when climbing, I'm often, people tell me, well, I'm afraid of heights. I say, that's not a problem. You just don't look down. And you need to focus in the right place. I think beginning with early education, we need to think about how we prepare our students to address open-ended problems. And if they feel confident enough to address open-ended problems where you don't necessarily know the solution and there may be multiple solutions, then you begin to develop a generation of people who can move into, I believe, taking more risk. And the challenge of giving people the confidence to go places where they're uncomfortable is very important. And I try to instill that in my students. Mike always takes me to places that I feel uncomfortable. I mean, the ideas that you described are really outstanding opportunities to think outside the box, to take risk in a new place. And I'm sure you didn't feel comfortable exploring drones, but I bet you do now.
Yeah, certainly I know a lot more about it. I do have to add, though, I think it's, as Charlie points out, the risk piece, risk is about what you don't know. And one of the challenges we face is the people who are responsible for developing the drugs or the products don't know enough about the people who are the customers, whether they're payers or patients. And we don't do enough to get them out to meet our payers or patients in their own native environment, right? So we've recently done a product, a development of a package for neonates for HIV, right? And the packaging team had never gone to a clinic where neonates were being treated. And so the package we developed, the suspension was too concentrated. Try getting 2 drops in a kid's mouth. It's not going to happen, right? And neonates. And so in visiting the clinic, in working with a team that was responsible for trying to develop globally solutions for neonatal treatment in HIV, we came up with a completely different package and set of tools to help the caregiver be able to administer the drug to a neonate. We don't do enough of that. And I have to say, the team was very uncomfortable being in that setting, yet they have the tools in the toolbox and the eyes to look at the problem in a way that is different than the marketing team or the physician team.
Do you think to sort of build on that, we need to sort of, as we look at the sort of the narrative today from sort of lab through to bedside, that actually as we've got more and more sort of engrossed in the science and the technology and the innovations, be it cell therapy or sort of regen meds or DNA sort of resequencing, we've forgotten the patient and we're not actually engaging with that patient community sufficiently. Do you think we've kind of lost touch with that part of the value chain?
I think the technologies that we're working on now, the new types of drugs, go very much beyond the way we've treated patients before, but they do kind of take the face of the patient in many ways out of the process, and we do need to bring that back in.
I think that's going to be more of a problem going forward because as we look at expanding the regions, geographies, markets, emerging markets, if we don't understand the patient in the developed world, how well do we understand the patient in the emerging markets? And my experience in India and China over many years has been very humbling in terms of what I have seen and the realization of this last mile problem. And it really is about going to a place that you don't feel comfortable and understanding how to address that real problem. And that's going to be a bigger problem. That's we're a long ways from addressing that.
And just changing tack slightly, and more to Gerard and Bernadette really, around sort of digitalization, there's huge amounts in the media now in terms of Internet of Things, manufacturing 4.0, machine-to-machine, blockchain, lots of principles that are being applied elsewhere. Are we doing enough within our pharma life sciences world to embrace those technologies, or are we still sort of playing on the periphery and playing it safe almost, and therefore losing the advantage of those technologies?
Maybe I can kick off. I think it's a huge opportunity area. I think it's a very heavily regulated area, or maybe an area where we need to define new regulation. And, I think maybe the biggest opportunity is to do more with regulatory bodies. And, I guess the patient information leaflet that I just described, is doing just that. But, certainly in the likes of devices, within GSK we have a lot of inhaled respiratory devices. We've just launched Ellipta. When I think of, a device and as an asthmatic, something that can tell me that I've taken the dose at the right time, given me a prompt if I forget, have I taken it correctly, am I feeling okay? And you can imagine, that information feeding back to my physician, who's able to monitor ultimately my compliance, and how effective the medication is. I mean, there's huge opportunities, but there's huge issues as well. Yeah.
There are also some opportunities in clinical trials, so we shouldn't forget the devices to give feedback on how well our medication may be performing in clinical studies.